sorry, it's freezing outside. We're all exhausted. Totally right there with you. So hopefully today's session will kind of make things a little bit more interesting and get you guys thinking about this concept of using lean practices in the classroom. So before we get to that, first off, we'll introduce myself or ourselves. This is
Leonard Medlock. I'm a product manager at EdSurge. Cut my teeth on everything from writing newsletters to designing websites, so I'm not a technical guy. It's a lot more to talk about, but let me go and choose it.
I'm Jo Madda. I am a senior editor at EdSurge, so I do more of the writing and the editing, but I actually used to be a teacher. Anybody teach science in here? Yes. Okay, so I used to teach 6th and 7th grade science, which was fabulous. And then our math teacher quit, so then I ended up teaching math as well. But it was a blast. I miss it every day. And a lot of what we'll talk about today came from sort of my own experiences as a classroom teacher and frustrations that I had in the industry. Now, before we get started, you've heard us say the word EdSurge. Does anybody in here read EdSurge? Yeah. All right. Has anybody in here, if you don't read, heard of EdSurge? All right, cool. That's fine. Here we go. So EdSurge is an organization. We're both from the Bay Area, which is a little bit warmer than out here. And essentially, EdSurge, our role in this industry is to bring you guys as much information as possible about education technology so that you can make the best decisions for you. Part of this comes, I think, from experiences that our founder had when she was working in a library in a school in the Bay Area and realized that, you know, basically the most technology the school had was essentially desktop computers, which, does anybody still have desktop computers at their school, like sitting in a computer lab? Yeah, same. In my experience, when I was a wonderful teacher in Los Angeles, I'm sure some of you know where this is going. There have been experiences in LA where iPads have been purchased and not exactly used in the most correct way. And so because of that, we hope to bring you guys this information via news, via these big events that we have called summits. We have jobs postings if you're interested in going into more tech-heavy roles. And we also have this index. And the reason I'm going to share this with you real quick is it's not so much related to what we're going to talk about today, but if you guys need information about technology, we have literally every product out there reviewed by teachers just like you guys. And we also have something called Concierge, which Leonard is actually
Yeah, I manage the EdSurge Concierge. I'll be brief. What we do is work with school and district administrators to align their instructional needs to the relevant products that are in the space. Our whole thing is we don't know what's happening in the classroom. We don't pretend like we know what's happening in the classroom, especially across 4.4 million classrooms in the country, but we do know a lot about what technology is out there, and we can help with that discovery and selection process. It's a free service. We work with you to really acutely define what you're trying to accomplish. If you want some technology that's a unicorn, we'll tell you that you're a unicorn hunter and that doesn't exist, but if it does exist, we'll try to point you in that direction.
And we'll be here, we'll stick around after the session today. So if you have any more questions about that, we'll be here. But the reason you came today is because you were curious about what this word lean actually means and how you can use it in the classroom. So I'm obsessed with memes. It's one of my best and worst qualities at the same time. Thank you. Did you see that? That's a student right there. She loves memes. Kids love these things. Just like that, just so we all know. I feel like this meme is a great example of what I used to do in my classroom day in and day out, which was if the kids didn't understand, I would think to myself, okay, I'll just redo it again tomorrow. But the problem is that I would literally teach the lesson the exact same way, assuming that the kids would, you know, because they had already heard it before, they would take it in more easily or something of that nature. I didn't really switch up my lesson. Could this be because I was a crappy first-year teacher? Absolutely. But I think it's also because in a lot of teaching environments, it's hard for us to get the time to experiment with different teaching practices and see which ones work for both us and for our students. And in the Silicon Valley, there's actually something similar, which is called the lean startup model. Companies have started doing this, which is where the article that I wrote came from. It was called How Teachers Can Run Classrooms Like Lean Startups. Has anybody in here ever read The Lean Startup by Eric Ries or heard of this book? Okay, if you haven't, don't worry about it. Because basically, if you've ever taught science, there's a very similar process in the science classroom that is connected to what the Lean Startup is, and it is the scientific method. It's this concept of essentially having a hypothesis and then experimenting to see what comes out of that. Eric Ries, when he published this book, made it a little bit more basic than the scientific method, where it was the concept of see what works for your users, but by building things and then rapidly experimenting with them. And every time you experiment, change it until you get to something that the users really love. And in this sense, building is the idea of actually putting it together, and then you figure out a way to measure it and learn from that measurement, which again is pretty similar to the scientific method. Now, basically, I will say this with a disclaimer. Teachers do this, you guys do this, I think, very frequently, and you might do it, what's a good way to describe this? Informally. But the benefit of thinking about it more strategically, which we're going to help you do today, is that you can actually get concrete data and feedback to suggest what is working or not working with your practices. And just for the record, I have never actually seen, I've seen teachers do this, and I think that they find that it's really useful when they actually map it out, because they're also able to kind of go back in time and look at what they tried. So when they work with other teachers, they can say, I've tried this, here's what did and did not work for me. So that's something to consider when you're actually using this in your classroom. All right, now we've talked about sort of a little bit about the why, and the who is clearly you and your students, but what you're really here to learn is the what. How do you actually do this in your classroom? And so Leonard has a lot of experience working with districts, and what was the district you were just talking about today? Douglas County. And...
actually, I'm in the room right now.
Oh, where are they? Oh, yay! Mary Murphy, another Mary.
Mary say that it's not all like pseudoscience, Silicon Valley BS. It's actually actually has some meaning to it.
Yeah, just so we're all clear, like even though Leonard and I live in the Bay Area, you could not believe how tired we are of hearing the words disrupt and innovate. What else? What are some of the other buzzwords? Personalized. Don't worry, I've used it myself. Adaptive. So this is a safe space, trust. And if you have any questions, you should absolutely feel free to ask us, because the Silicon Valley doesn't always know what it's talking about. That's the biggest thing that you will learn today. So to get us started, I'm going to let Leonard take it from here. And while he's kind of introducing today's event, I'm going to pass out these very helpful sheets that you guys are going to be using.
Great. So first, I just want to stop and say, is all this making sense so far? Are we all on the same page around lean startup, the kind of analogous or the analogy with the scientific method, this idea that you kind of have a thesis that you want to test out? We're going to go through 5 steps today. I try to make them pretty straightforward. We're going to introduce a lot of concepts, but essentially we're going to ground ourselves in practice, think about what are we currently doing, like what are the pedagogical approaches we're taking, what are the classroom management approaches we're taking, what do the kids look like, sound like, think like, act like, what are the products we're using, what are the processes. Just really try to ground ourselves in the reality of our classrooms. And then we're going to go into learn focus. I was a lecturer at the D School for a while, and so I haven't, even though I'm kind of anti-D School right now, I still love learn focus.
Leonard, what is the D School?
The Stanford D School is the design, Hassel-Plotner Institute of Design at Stanford University. And they do a lot of human-centered methodology and design methodology. Then we're kind of going to look at the possibilities and try to form some points of view around ideal approaches we can take in that space. Things we may have been thinking about, ideas you may have heard around EduCon that you're thinking about and wondering how you can actually implement, but don't actually know where to start. And then we're going to plan an experiment, and specifically I bring up this word around engagement, because a lot of times, whether it's in the classroom or otherwise, I think this is actually really true in Silicon Valley, that we have big ideas and we have great ideas that we want to try out, and we think about the programmatic aspects of all of it. Oh, how am I going to create this worksheet? Or what am I going to do minute by minute by minute? Or am I following the right steps? And we're not thinking about whether or not we're actually engaging the people that are in front of us. So we're going to plan some experiments specifically around engagement, understanding that the programmatic piece can happen through your PLNs, through going to conferences, through Google. You can always figure out the programmatic pieces, but it's hard to figure out that engagement piece. And then finally, we're going to talk about how you can bring it back to practice, actually make a plan. Since this is, our students aren't here, actually have a plan to take it back to practice and try to practice some of these mindsets when you're back in the classrooms, on Monday and beyond. So with that, I'm going to take one of these.
Can I ask a nice question?
Of course.
Is there this lean startup alternative to another startup model?
Yeah, so I think okay, here's the history of Silicon Valley. And again, I'm not big on Silicon Valley. My favorite quote is Silicon Valley makes a lot of solutions to problems that don't exist. So take all this with a grain of salt. What's that?
Yeah, you can tweet
You can
that.
definitely tweet that.
Absolutely.
You can attribute to me too. I don't they know how I feel. In the 80s, a lot of companies that are now behemoth companies, when they went to get startup capital, you couldn't just get, $50,000 and try your big idea because the startup costs were so high. So it wasn't like, oh, me and my friends are going to take $50,000 from friends and family. None of my friends and family had $50,000, but Silicon Valley friends, and we're going to try this idea in our garage, and then if it's good, we can go raise more money. That's how it works today. But in the 80s, the technology wasn't robust enough, so the startup capital was really, really high. And so when you went to go to an investor, you had to have a formal business plan, have a growth model of how everything was going to perfectly work for the next 10 years. And then it was all about getting the right people together and marching, very disciplined through this plan, regardless of what's right or wrong. If at any point in the plan you failed, it was because you got the wrong people, not because you had the wrong plan. And then I think in the late 90s, going into the early 2000s, kind of this new idea arose that, hey, like maybe the plan was wrong from the get-go. So let's be open to actually changing the plan along the way. And that's where the lean startup kind of mindset came out of. So there's a lot of different, I think, buzzwords around there that all kind of describe that same phenomenon, but Eric Ries has popularized it around lean startup because it comes from lean manufacturing. That was already a popular term in corporate settings.
Mostly because when he founded his company, he went through that somewhat more money and time heavy, robust sort of process, and his company ended up failing. And so he said, if I could go back in time, this is what I would do.
And so you can actually think, a lot of times, I'm sure all of you can agree that the classroom feels like that sometimes. You have a plan, and you never stop to think, is the plan wrong? It's like, or maybe you do because you're in the middle of it, but your administrators are like, oh, the person's wrong, not the plan's wrong. And so we're kind of trying to bring a little bit of that into this space, understanding that there are some very specific differences between what happens in the consumer tech world and what happens in the classroom. So everyone should have a worksheet like this. It's pretty straightforward. You don't have to use it. You can fold it over and keep it later. We can send you a digital copy. So if you want to take notes outside of this worksheet, that's fine. But really, I want everyone to take maybe 3 to 5 minutes individually to reflect on what I call your learning environment, because some people may not be in a classroom. You may be responsible for a school or a district, or you may be actually working with more adults than students. But whatever your learning environment looks like, take some time to describe that. I put a big box here because I'm a visual learner. I like to draw, but if you want to describe it in words, that's perfectly fine. Just thinking about who are the people, what are the processes, what are the problems you encounter, what are the products that you're using, whether that's textbooks or technology or whatever the case may be, and really just try to ground yourself in what your current reality is. We're going to take about 3 to 5 minutes. If anyone has any questions or confusions, I'm happy to come over and chat with you.
And Leonard, during this time, should they be talking with each other or not talking with each other?
Y'all are adults. You can do what you want to do.
We're not going to give you rules. You got to.
So I don't have rules. But if you want to talk with one another, if that's helpful for you to kind of tease out what's happening in your current learning environment, then go for it. But I do want everyone individually to do the exercise.
And if you find that you get it done in a minute, then I would encourage you, look at other people's and see what other people have put in there, because you might get inspiration from some of the other things that people have mentioned in their boxes. Okay, so we'll go ahead and time you. So 3 to 5 minutes starting now.
Yes.
That's a good question. You're late.
I'm rolling around.
Is Maria?
I'm assessing.
I wonder if is it bad if we put on music? Probably not.
You can put it on.
Yes, I ran an entrepreneurship program. What do we see?
You should do this.
There's an organization that I need to connect you with if this is an area that you're interested in.
I would say we are.
And that's going to start here.
No, sorry.
No, you work. I'm sure you are.
Or I don't even.
You know what I just realized? I bet Pandora is not linked. Yeah. I bet Pandora.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll check out.
Oh, nice. Cool.
Actually, that's right, Leonard. If you use, you might want to use your phone because if I do it, then the microphone's going to be loud.
I'm gonna walk around and then we'll come back and see what you're checking.
So this is,
Seed Spot. Oh, they're out of Arizona.
yeah.
Yeah, I met the who's the woman, the CEO of this organization? Yeah, she sent me an email one time. She said if you're ever in Arizona, you should go check us out.
Yeah. Have you talked to her?
Not recently,
She's
and
my ex-girlfriend.
oh, that's interesting. Thank you for telling me that piece of information.
No, and we're very close.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. No.
By the way, that microphone is picking up everything that we're talking about.
Oh, that's right. She's my ex-girlfriend, and I still help her. I was going to show you. So, this is on a list, right? So I'm helping them with this stuff. So I'd love for you to connect with them.
I drew a little thing. I have them in like twos, like desks. Like we have those like desks with a little things, and I like put them in two, and they're like in 3 rows in my top. So I got pairs. I did 4s for like September.
4s are what we're supposed to be doing in our math curriculum, and I'm just like, it's so hard.
4s, they just like, they face each other and they just talk to each other.
Yeah.
So I'm done.
And I'm okay with like pairs because I don't know, it's so much easier. I just want them to talk to each other. But then
I'd rather keep them
it's
on.
good for them to develop those skills.
I'd rather keep them in like rows and files, I feel like some to do group works. I don't know if we can do group work in separate groups.
I'm forced to. You don't have the word group. It's just like, okay, do this column seven. And not when you're talking. I don't think any of us have a problem to No, they talk constantly. The seniors, really don't like that. I don't the one thing is that like they'll give you the variance. I'm like, okay, fine, it's fine. Like I just never talk. I didn't like concept that like I didn't use it last semester. No, it's like, so for me, like, I mean, it kind of, like at the end of the week, I put in the meeting, and if they weren't there for a day, then I like, did the progress or something, like, so like, let's say they were there for like 2 days, and like, got 6 hours, and like.
I give them like, I'll month, I'll be like, don't take a grades for it. They don't check their grades.
No.
It's like,
I know, then they come to me. Always coming late. I also started giving it attendance and attendance, so that it's like they got 1 point a day for being there a year.
Okay, so hopefully I see a lot of I see some seating charts, I see some infographics, I see some beautifully written prose, a lot of different things. In part 2 of Ground Yourself, I want you to get a little more specific and think about list up to three. Actually, try to list all three. Three parent best practices that you feel really comfortable and confident about in your classroom. And it can be something as simple as taking attendance. It can be something as complex as some unit that you really like to teach. Whenever you're really excited when this unit comes around because you understand it really well, you got the content and skills down. It could be something else. It could be anything. It's just where do you feel really comfortable with this practice in your classroom or in your learning environment, I should say. Just try to list out three.
Try to come up with three. I know all
Yes, sir.
of you have those.
And the extra the sheet up.
Yes.
What is that?
You got.
Oh, it's screwed up.
You messed up.
Huh?
It's okay, it happens. Right behind you.
No.
I'm pretty good at that.
I like how you did attitude/assess. And that's really hard for some teachers to do.
Oh, yeah.
I went in with like 4 months and I was just nice, and it's like crazy.
How do you think these two kind of connect with each other?
Yes, and this. Okay, so I think all of my kids have like that. So when I'm able to do that, I'm like, they're engaged. Maybe
It's just like it's an organization called
well, like,
I could see that. I mean, it's always nice to have some kids who like push me. But in kind of a funny, sort of like sassy type of way.
but the thing is, I think it's really
Yeah.
because if the kids check out the subject matter and the
we're gonna see that. So there's doing individual work.
there's like some
And if people want to break it into
One of the best ones in my classroom was like that's it. This one is-
practice.
But at the same time, it's that's great. That's what I want my entire life is.
We'll give you guys about 1 more minute.
I really do.
Should I call them?
I think the kids really like something.
Uh-oh, did my computer just? No, it didn't.
Yeah, I tried that. I mostly get like voicemails.
Everybody's looking.
It's like, I don't have to waste any time. It's just like, I haven't seen that yet.
Let's move on. Because it's already 1:27. I just want to make sure we have time.
All right, everybody. If you're still working on that, that's cool. Because I'm gonna stop talking a minute and then you can keep working. But at this point, so it sounds like we've got some great stuff. I'm glad that you guys are able to put down the things that you do well.
Does anyone want to share quickly
Yeah.
something they feel they do well?
Go for it. Let's hear it, Chris. Okay.
So I tried. I
Speaks
took
for the table.
Yeah, I took the Mary Jo challenge to this in a sentence. So it's probably a run-on, but hopefully it's not. In my practice, I spark conversation centered on provocative text, offering multiple frames of interpreting to grow larger projects for larger audiences. That, yeah. And then last part, I want to put a little, good verb in there somewhere.
Spoken like a true language arts teacher.
I was just gonna say,
I gotta figure out the last line.
as a science teacher, I was like,
The
whoa.
The first two I feel I'm happy about. That last line I still gotta figure out.
Awesome. Nice job, Chris.
Anyone else
Very
want to
nice.
share out one of the things that they feel really confident about in their practice?
Go for it.
Mine is a little more simple, but it's something we teach like a champion, definitely off, but circulating. I'm really good at making sure I don't stay at the front of the room. I circulate, I walk around so I can monitor and assess and guide.
Awesome. Anybody else good circulating in here? Be honest. That's great. I was horrible at that when I was a teacher. So I'm glad there are other people that are actually doing that well. Yes.
As a science teacher, I'm really good at organization, because you have to be, because their safety is first.
Organizing the kids, organizing yourself, or both?
Everybody.
Everybody. All right, so lots of solid stuff. As I was walking around, I was seeing a really nice variety of things that were based in classroom management, some things in content, some things in lesson planning. So you know what your classroom looks like. But now we're going to move on to something that we call flare and focus the possibilities, which essentially has to do with what you could envision for what your classroom could become and whatever you want it to become, how you could get there. So right here, you'll see this really beautiful sort of math type chart that some of you math teachers may recognize, except the x-axis and the y-axis are slightly different. So what's going to happen in this section is, what we're going to ask you to do is brainstorm some possibilities. We say 10, that's a good number to strive for, but it's sort of up to you. Brainstorm the possibilities of what you would like to see or do in your learning environment. It could be something that you haven't yet tried. It could be something that maybe you tried and it didn't go so well, but you want to try again. It could be something that you don't even think is possible. Like, we're asking you to push yourself and push each other. And then what we're going to ask is that you each have this giant piece of paper in front of you. All right? So in your groups, when you've got some good possibilities on there, we'd like you to take one of your pens, and we'll pass out some markers too, and actually recreate the graph as it looks on this sheet, on this big piece of paper. And I believe, are we having them draw or put Post-its on there?
Draw.
Okay, so then we would like you to draw on the graph your different possibilities. But here's the thing. You want to do Post-its? Okay, we'll do Post-its. So the X and the Y axis are a little bit different from typical math school students that you'll see. So we have high impact to low impact. So when you're looking and thinking about your possibilities, what sort of impact is it going to have in your classroom? And put it accordingly. And then also, hard to do versus easy to do. Some of the things that we want to do are wonderful, but are there going to be fiscal challenges? Is it the type of thing that's difficult to do by yourself? Or is it the type of thing that you could implement starting Monday? So we're going to give you a little bit more time for this activity because it takes a considerable amount of time to brainstorm and actually put this together. But we'd like you to repurpose these and use these so that in a moment we're actually going to walk around and be able to kind of see some of the ideas that other people have. Any questions before we get started?
Let me just give a couple of notes on who's brainstormed before. Raise your hand if you've ever done an effective brainstorm.
Effective.
Yeah.
Effective.
Who knows what an effective brainstorm is? An effective brainstorm is where you don't question the feasibility or viability of your idea before it comes out of your mouth.
Right.
It's a generative process.
Like, if you were to look at this, not everything is going to fit in the high impact, easy to do space. And that's great. That is great.
So I would encourage
you
to forget about that impact map altogether and focus on generating ideas. You can write on Post-it notes. I like Post-it notes because they force you to headline an idea. You can't have flowery, long, beautiful sentences. You got to headline that core idea.
You can write haikus. You can draw on the Post-it.
You can draw your idea. Yep. So I encourage you to Post-it notes, but try to be as much as possible in a generative mindset. And then once you have all of your ideas out, you can come back as a group and place them on the impact map and kind of see how they flesh out.
And on that note, if you're writing on the Post-its, don't put it on the map yet. Keep this closed. Put your Post-its to the side, and then you can put them on the map afterwards so that the map doesn't sort of designate what you're thinking about. Kind of similar to what we're doing. Any questions? You guys ready to brainstorm effectively? All right, go ahead. Go to.
For the first semester, just remind this call you.
Oh, we could like brainstorm the right now, I don't do any experiments. I know they all experiments.
You said. So.
Oh.
Yeah.
Like
Come up with 40 opportunities.
we're not talking about that.
Because you're gonna have ample opportunity to evaluate them. So this generates.
So are these things that we're doing, or we'd like to see in our class?
Things that we would like to see. So that's why it's like, that's why I'm saying like, hard to implement.
Yeah.
But-
Is that not a?
No, I'm wondering, I'm wondering things that like, oh, okay, that was like this process.
I'd like students to be. Wait, that's a cool idea. What if one of these sites?
So we can all.
I think we're just trying to make a bunch of stickies and like stick them on here.
New Jersey.
What about like students excited? If I could figure out
It would be a lot of
Always like January to
Or I get 0 points. Like, get 0 points.
but then they'll like a lot of people say, at least in my
I think one week of
Okay, yeah, I know people haven't read that.
Yes. One of the reasons I'm like kind of like down is I started new classes this week, so I got new space. So like, I know, but like I'm also I should really start brainstorming.
When does it start?
It was supposed to start on Monday, but it didn't start until Wednesday.
Oh, so you
But like,
wait, this is amazing.
I didn't just meet them because a lot of the ones
In the spirit of making sure that you're generating and not evaluating,
I haven't had.
I challenge everyone to come up with at least 3 ideas that cost a minimum of $1 million. A minimum of $1 million. Now these are ideal approaches that you want to take into your classroom. I don't know. Ideally, well, if you wanted to like have a classroom, if you wanted your learning environment to be a cruise around the world, it might cost $1 million.
Oh, but I don't think of that as a best practice. I think of that as something else.
So I think what in a different way of thinking about it, think about what I would write in if money wasn't an issue.
So it's not really best practice. It's about creating.
These are ideal. So a best practice is not a best practice until you've done it a lot of times and you know that it works. We're thinking about ideal. What's ideal to you?
Like, I can put this paper out.
What's
there,
ideal? Like, what are the things you want to do that you're not doing?
If you walked into a classroom that was your first, yeah, it's probably the greatest thing.
That's what it looks like. It is.
I imagine with Snap, it's really
Let's take notes of that. Do you know what this is?
I started doing like guided notes in every class because the kids would know. That's sad.
I'll give you guys. I'll give you guys. I'll let you
Yeah, I got like he's like, well, he really wanted it. I still want it. You write something about targeting so that you can get through. Yeah, I started. That's why. Like, you guys are doing a lot of translating.
Yeah, differentiate violence.
I mean, not because no one's ever said. Why don't you just like all of the other time, like during the so like for example, so like
structure.
Keeping it relevant.
Maybe it's not even a class.
Oh, that's like more personal.
Got there.
Yeah, like.
So I'll give you.
But that's
Cut the space, separate it so you kind of see.
oh, like you're not taking from words.
So even something like that, like even though that's not necessarily real, it shows that it's more about getting outside of that type of stuff. That type of stuff. Even stuff that might not seem possible. Oh my God! So the second one, so many like sleeping, like they get a but yeah, so in what I do, so it's like not administrative field along when I and it's really like it might not necessarily be like work, but it's something that and then like I was just going to say that I have patients long-term or hard. So that's actually a really good question. So in that sense, that was something there's kind of a cost, like this is something that's something I am to like how else you see like what's going on. Like I need to
oh, like instructional material, practice.
Like if you do it for
Okay, if you have not yet started on your big sheet of paper, now is a good time to make that transition. Open that sucker up and start putting those Post-its on there.
No problem.
I think
We got 45 minutes.
yeah, so we got 45 minutes. So we're going to do this for about 15 more minutes.
No, not this. They should have their ideas. Now they got this spot that they do.
Okay,
Hard to do, easy to do.
okay. So we'll do 5 minutes and then I'll let you transition to this.
I'm gonna stop and say I got some feedback. I'm gonna
Good, excellent. Okay, I have a couple of things too. A lot of people ask me like, is this just about me or am I looking at it for like my person? I'm telling you to focus on yourself.
That's fine.
Yeah. Do we have a Sharpie?
Oh,
perfect. It's like this. So just take this stuff. That takes some focus.
Well, I feel like this should be what is that consistent discipline?
Not my culture, so different. And then I'll have next time go like, oh, really be and it really
Approaching the limit of the sky is the limit.
also I was so
Harder than
Phone calls home is like,
I think a lot of them.
they're just all.
This is still the hardest thing compared to some of the things.
just
I think this will have, some of these will have to be.
Just what do you mean by bigger classroom? Getting a bigger classroom? Well, that's probably really hard to do. I know I can't get a bigger classroom. My classroom's actually pretty small.
Hands on. Hands on.
Oh, I already do this. We're forced to go with you.
Go down. I like both.
Or you go down. See, it actually has to get my music. Yeah, I can still remember. Give them it's like barely easy to do. They like it. I think you can hear musicians use financial. Tracking objects. Oh, this is way it takes a long time. It's hard to I think it's really hard to do. I don't know.
Is that high impact? No, I don't know. It's hard to travel around the world to see the highest impact.
I see the same thing that
Travel around the world. You can't even do that with the student.
So we're gonna take about 60 more seconds, and then we're gonna keep going.
Go hard to go home. So I'm kind of connecting a lot of external spaces for conversation, presentation of like we're doing all this stuff in school. It makes no sense to create outside tonight. So like, how do you build this sort of like external space? How do you even have mentors? It's like, how do you, right? How do you make that connection, right?
That's a little harder.
Big time to collaborate on work with other colleagues.
Everyone is pointed at that.
No, not kidding.
Because every teacher knows that. Every teacher knows that.
My windows are open. Are you kidding me? Let me turn the thermostat.
Okay, so I want to temporarily bring the conversation back to center and talk about what the next steps are. I see a lot of great ideas. I think everyone is laughing and crying at the idea of temperature control for classrooms being an ideal approach. something that we ideally should have anyway, but we don't. And I see pretty much everyone has at least 10 or 15 ideas, so that's great. Before we move forward, I need to apologize and check my privilege a little bit, because in the work I do day in and day out, I don't necessarily have the immediacy that comes with having to work with young people every day. And so I realize that sometimes you hear exercises like this and you're like, well, what's the point of all of this? This is like not grounded in reality. And actually that is the idea behind it. Trying to use this as a safe space where you can get away from your practice a little bit. And the intent of this brainstorm activity is to imagine what could be. And now what we're going to get into next is really try to think about how do we systematically march there, even though getting there may take a school year, 3 school years, who knows how long it'll take. So I understand that, you know, why would I even think ideally what's $1 million idea? Because the immediacy of your work like doesn't give you that freedom that I have in my job to think about that. So I want to apologize for that. But I think it's good that some people brought that up, because the next step is to really get into hypothesizing what will change if we were actually to have this ideal approach in place. And then once we have a hypothesis of what will change, we can back off the actual programmatic aspects of like, well, how am I going to plan it and who's going to pay for it and how am I going to get this and that and the other, and focus on the important pieces, which I think Laura brought up, like trust and accountability and responsibility and all those engagement variables that are much more harder to accomplish and to improve over time. So that's where we're headed. So I was happy to get that feedback because that's where we're headed, but I also want to apologize because I didn't make that clear up front to everyone. So if you flip over your sheet, actually, does anyone really want to share out just any idea that they had that they thought was really funny or amazing or ridiculous or transformational or sorry, it's a buzzword, transformation. Disruptive.
I don't see vomit.
There you go.
Flyer.
You set her up. That was good. She said she would vomit on herself if someone said disruptive.
I vomited a little bit in my mouth just now.
Okay, there we go. Does anyone want to quickly share out before we move forward?
Or anything that, yeah.
Ability to control cellular data access while students are in the classroom.
Interesting. Would you say that that's hard or easy to do?
Hard.
And high impact or low impact?
High.
Nice. Anyone else want to share out?
Federal crime.
Anything that anybody put on theirs that was sort of shocking at first, but then everybody else kind of agreed with it? Yes.
My partner here put controlling the temperature in your classroom. Seems very simple, but very necessary.
And very difficult.
And very difficult, that's true. Some of the things that come on here are not necessarily related to practice, or they might just be basic, what you would think are basic human necessities that unfortunately you don't always have the most control over. Anybody else? Yes.
Alternative seating and collaborative spaces that are equipped with technology that whoever can use.
And where did you put that on the matrix?
The student or the collaboration spaces with built-in technology, high impact, hard to do just because it requires money. Collaboration space itself is high impact and not necessarily hard to do. It's the technology out there. And then the non-traditional seating is kind of right in the middle in terms of easy or hard to do. And it's, I would say, in the middle of impact as well.
Okay.
But on the higher impact side.
Did anybody else have spacing or environment in that nature? Yeah, that's actually something I've been hearing a lot about. And it's interesting how sometimes it's in your control and sometimes it's not, depending on how you do it.
It just depends on what your priorities are. Like I did it in my classroom, but I had to buy it. Like I had to buy beanbag chairs and rugs and stuff to make it.
To actually support it, right? Yes.
David here is a systems lead for New York City Department of Education, and he put a number of like systems to create, but they're hard to do, not because like the system creation, but like the ongoing like maintenance of them becomes like the hard part of like, is it accurately shown? Yes, it was put in at one time, but is somebody going in there and updating it all the time? And I think like technically it's easy, right, to create the platform for it, but then the maintenance sort of scales it up into like a hard to do. Is it always sort of like reflective of accurate data?
Yes, I think I heard that at a couple of tables. Like when you first start it, it might be easy, but down the line, it might get a little bit more difficult. Okay, nice work.
So I'm gonna ask everyone to flip over their worksheet to the top left. And we're gonna make a little bit of a shift, as I alluded to earlier, in the sense that we have these ideas. I suggest that you start in the upper upper right-hand quadrant, because that's the things that in theory have the least barriers to try to accomplish. But any idea that you think is relevant to your work, you can choose. And the idea is to see if we can form hypotheses around the student, or for some of the people who are in more administrative roles, that may mean the teacher or some other person within the system, and the environment itself. So I'll use our temperature control as a guinea pig. It's like students, and I'm gonna make this up because
If you do one, I'll do one like that's more of like a classroom practice.
so it would be like, I'm guessing here that students will act like normal people in normal working environments if it's not freezing or really hot all the time in the learning environment. So that might be an hypothesis around, for example, temperature control. Or if we take something around the collaborative spaces, then it may be, students will act with agency, or students will feel that working with others is valuable, or students will think that it's okay to ask other people for the answers if the learning environment is collaborative, and so on and so forth. So the idea is to take this ideal approach you have and form a hypothesis of, and assume that it's true, that it's actually there, and form a hypothesis around how students will act or feel or think when it's in place, and what the learning environment will look like or interact like as a result of having this ideal approach in place. And don't worry about wordsmithing. You don't have to use, I put the template there because I found that it's easy for people to kind of fill in the blanks, but if you want to create your own way of stating that, that's perfectly okay. But really try to focus on the two pieces. What will the humans in the space act like or think like or feel like? And then what will the environment itself, the products and the furniture and the space and all those other things, how does that look like? What does that interact like as a result of putting this ideal approach into practice? I know it's kind of a big shift from where we were going, but is everyone cool with that?
Anybody have a question? A couple of you during the earlier activity actually were already sort of doing this. You were saying like, I want students will feel safe. That is something that you could reappropriate here. But what is it going to take to get to that point? This is sort of like again, if you want to get there, what needs to happen in order to allow for that? And again, you don't have to worry about fiscal limitations. Like, just again, in an ideal setting, you want them to do this, and in order to get there, you have to do this.
Focus on the people and the environment, not all the other extraneous factors around it.
That was actually, that was one other question, just to clarify, which I want to thank Oliver for bringing up. Right now, we're focusing on you guys as teachers. You could do this with administrators, but right now, this is just about you and your classroom. So focus on that sort of microcosm for the sake of this activity today. Okay. All right, we're going to give you about 3 to 5 minutes for this, and feel free to bounce ideas off of each other if you so choose. Go ahead.
If there's one ideal approach that several people agree upon, you can form a group around that and share the same hypotheses. You don't have to do this individually.
Yeah.
I'm just going to be quiet. So it's 2 o'clock.
What's that?
So it's 2 o'clock. And then,
This will be a small group.
okay. And then we'll do the accountability.
Oh, that's true.
Can I just bring back the point you brought earlier? You said that if you could, you would like have less mobile data or something like that. What was that?
Less.
carrier data?
I would like it if, and only in the classroom. Outside the classroom, only in the classroom. There was control over. And two reasons. One is I think there's something to be said about saying, all right, in this time period, yeah, we're not gonna do anything. And I do this with my students. I put my phone, take my phone out, put it in airplane, set it down. We're not doing this. We're staying with the people in the room, and then we can extend beyond that. What I find is I have a lot of students from that is it is a powerful experience for them, but they're very unwilling to take that first step until they experience that. And so they do the smile, the constant check and finding a way to find a balance in that they can. The other is because of some boarding school. Our kids live one here. So with that, we don't have the parental interaction to keep an eye out on some kids here. And so we have major problems with bullying. That's fine. Because it's really hard for us to get talk to parents.
Right.
Yeah, your kids do this, and their parents don't stop. Put on parental controls. So those are. I'm guessing you think you should have it.
I mean, now I know every school is a different environment, so I would say that I think that if you talk to the kids and tell them, like, you should have, like, maybe a project where they have that interaction where they're, like, using, like, instruments to use in a project, and then in another project you say, all right, you're not going to use teaching that at all. So they have that choice where it's like, all right, you can use them here. Like in this one, I'm limiting you to not do it because I found that very helpful in the school. Like it really worked effectively. Now I'm not saying it will work for you, but I think that's something you should try out because it definitely worked for me.
Oh, and that's the way I try to look at it, is that because I'm not in an environment where I can turn on the switch and see the cellular data stops. So I do. It gets very challenging for us to and there's no way to sort of say, we want to figure out where we're less interested in being we want to see exactly. But it's very interesting for all kind of figuring it out. And it's a challenge because we just need to stop all ourselves.
It doesn't work.
They live here.
Right. So I just wanted to hear your perspective.
Thank you very much.
Would anyone like to share out their hypothesis? I'm just gonna go table by table. Okay, everyone, let's pause so we can keep going. I'm gonna do my what's my silly teacher?
If you can hear my voice, clap once. If you can hear my voice, clap twice. I feel like such a.
I got suspended from school like 4 times because I didn't follow that rule. I've been working my whole life, so I don't expect people to do what I say. I didn't do what other people said. So I wanted to quickly go around and hear people's hypotheses because that'll give me a way to explain what we're going to do for the rest of the session. So just from this group, one person, give me your hypothesis.
Sure. Students who feel like proactive learners if the learning environment interacts like a project-based classroom with fun tools and experiments.
Students will act like proactive learners when the learning environment is project-based with fun tools and experiences. How about this table?
I'll share. Students will feel like their schooling is a legitimate experience if the school has a coherent, robust grading policy.
Students will feel like, I'm going to work with you, students will feel like learning is legitimate or legitimized if the grading is coherent. The grading systems are coherent. How about you two? And transparent. What do we have going over here?
Let's see. Students will feel like they have a more human face to the new cultures and peoples about which they study. The learning environment looks like one where there are regular intercultural and unfamiliar interactions.
Well, you got to start from the top. I mean, that was a lot. That was like one more time.
Students will think like there's a more human face to the new cultures and peoples about which we study. If the learning environment interacts like one where there are regular intercultural interactions.
Got it. So students will understand the culture of what they're learning if their environment reflects
more
cultural awareness.
They'll see the people they're studying as people and not a
not
them
a thing
or a they.
Or
if they can have regular interactions
with people.
Got it.
That's deep. I like that. How about this table? I can read it for you.
I got it. Students will Students will feel like teachers are their teammates in their education if the learning environment looks like, this doesn't really work. If the learning environment provides frequent student-teacher conferences for their academics.
I think that actually makes a lot of sense.
Students will feel like they are teamwork. They're teammates with their teachers when the learning environment provides frequent student-teacher interaction or conferences. And this table here?
I said students will feel more in control of their learning if they know the objective of the lesson at the beginning.
Students will feel more in control if they know the objective at the beginning. Great. So if you look at the next section, we talk about programmatic versus engagement variables. And to be honest with you, this is not language that I use at all. It's kind of like abstract math terms. Like if someone asks me how much money how much change I get after buying something. I don't take the first number and say subtract this and then add this and divide this. I just tell them the amount because it's in my head. But I wanted to like lay it out as terms that you can kind of think about, because a lot of times it's easy to focus on what we want to do to students without thinking about how we are working or engaging with students. And this kind of goes back to your point around how do you build trust? How do you build accountability? All of these softer things that are really difficult to measure. And so it's easier to go to, well, let's just implement this thing and force it forward, regardless of how students actually like or act or feel or think about it. And so that was kind of the intention around using that template, because it loosely teases out what's programmatic, which is what the learning environment looks like or interacts like, and what's engagement, which is how people think and how they feel and how they act under certain situations. So hopefully this next step won't be too difficult. I put this little pyramid up here. I made this up for the first time ever. So this is kind of pseudoscience BS that I said I wouldn't do at the beginning of the session. But I think that we talk about this concept of build, measure, learn, and try to iterate and understand, like validate our learning. But I think there's two levels below. One is kind of the brass tacks. Everyone's comfortable there. How do we get money? How do we professionally develop ourselves? How do we set up the space? How do we do all these things? And the other piece is engagement, which some people are comfortable with and others aren't. So when I talk about plan your experiment around engagement, we want to go even a little bit more meta from what we ideally want to do and think about what are those engagement variables. Someone said students will feel like teammates with their teacher. Like, that's an engagement thing, feeling like a teammate with your teacher. We want to even test that piece out. Like, what do we have to do for our students to feel like we are their teammates, which is a whole kind of different thing from whether or not we want to set up a system for having frequent conferences and how we can track all the data and how they're going to roll out. That's all programmatic stuff. But this idea of like, me and my students are teammates, that's a big engagement thing that we can rest on itself. And so just quickly, maybe for 30 seconds, because I don't think it should be too difficult, try to tease out in your hypothesis, what are those things that are programmatic, meaning they have to kind of do with time, space, money, you know, the pedagogical approach, the curriculum I'm going to choose. And what are those things that are really about engagement? What are those variables? Behaviors, feelings, attitudes. If you can, try to separate those two things out in your hypothesis. And finally, what we're going to talk about is how do we set up an experiment. We're going to return to what are those things I already feel really, really comfortable doing? And how can I tweak those slightly so that I can test out engagement? So I can test out, well, if I already feel really comfortable taking attendance, for example, can I take attendance in a different way so my students feel like I'm their teammate and not their teacher? So we're going to kind of go full circle back to where we first started. What are we comfortable with? But I would like, if possible, for people to kind of split out what's programmatic, what's the stuff I can research, the stuff I can go to a conference for,
What's the stuff you have control?
the things I can control, the things I can talk to my colleagues about, versus what's the messy stuff? What are the behaviors, the attitudes, the feelings that I'm trying to create within my learning environment? Yes, sir.
So is my dad. So.
I'm from the South. I'm sorry, it just came out.
Is this a 30-second exercise? Because we're like sort of.
Maybe it's a 2. Well, I guess it's a 30-second exercise because I was telling. I think you guys heard me, but I think this kind of activity, if you wanted to take it back to your practice, is probably a 4 to 6 hour activity to actually set up and go. But we have an hour and a half, so I'm trying to get you all the way through so you can see how the framework looks, and then you can try to appropriate it for your actual practice. So I would like you to take a couple minutes maybe to try to separate those out, but you don't have to fully and completely do it. Just in the spirit of getting through the exercise and understanding end to end where we're going. Take a couple minutes.
So, yeah, it's 2 separate. So,
What I'm gonna, this can be done without art.
exactly.
So that's why I wanted to get here. That.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool.
What are I don't know if I can tell stories. Yeah, so I'm gonna shut them out.
If it's helpful, I can take someone's hypothesis and kind of model out separation. If it's helpful.
That would be helpful. Let's go with this one. So we've got a technology school, so this is feasible to try to do.
I feel like they're getting a rich learning experience relevant to the real world. That's space for most of your projects. So yeah, so the space and the multimedia stuff and all that, that's the programming stuff, right? But this idea of basically your engagement stuff is around this idea that you know what's relevant to them in the real world. So when you're thinking about behavior, feelings, and attitudes, you're trying to test like what's relevant. Like relevance is one thing. If they're a keyword enriched, like what are the behaviors of students in English?
So pretty much just fleshing out what that experience actually looks like. What does that feel like that is being given to the student?
Right, exactly. Yeah, from the engagement perspective, like, how do people feel? How do they behave? What are the attitudes? But that's ultimately the hardest part that you'll have to figure out for all the easier stuff to work out.
Right.
Logistics, like parts I want to see, I want to take the actual park and have them sign for it. But I can't get stuff. So there's some projects are co-teaching, yeah. I still remember
See, my
I'm gonna figure this out. I can figure out things about I don't play. What almost like exactly this?
Wait, so generation.
So in the remaining time we have, I really want to open up more for discussion. We kind of took more time than we planned on, but I want to open up for discussion and really talk through some of these things. If we look at the end-to-end process, the entire idea is really that this doesn't just apply to education. I think this applies universally for most people in our professions, but the entire idea is that we all have aspirational ideas and practices that we want to bring into the classroom. And oftentimes the reality of the day-to-day really makes that hard to even march towards over time. The easier thing, and probably even the smarter thing to do, is just to focus on the students that are right in front of you instead of focusing on slowly changing the environment around you. And so what we try to do is really start with, how do things look right now? Just as they are, better or worse. Where do we want to go? What's going to change? What's our hypothesis? What will change if we actually get there? And then let's not worry about, I heard someone say scheduling, right? Let's not worry about scheduling and planning and fundraising and all the things that we already worry about all the time anyway. But let's worry about engagement, the core interactions that need to happen behind our big idea if we actually want to see them into fruition. I'll give you a really good example. I guess I'll just talk about my work, but and I want to hear other examples too, but in our concierge service, essentially what we try to do is talk to an administrator, a school or a district administrator, exactly about what's going on in their classrooms or with their teachers or with their students. And our big idea is that if we can understand exactly what's going on, we can give you an honest opinion around what technology can do for you. And we are juxtaposing ourselves from pretty much the rest of the ed tech industry, because every other, except for cool people like Slate, I like Slate, so I'm not gonna hate on Slate. But a lot of other companies are trying to convince you that this is what you should be doing, and completely disregarding all of the expertise that you have over the years and all the experiences you have day in and day out. So we try to just like bring that process into something that you can fully control within your classroom. So I'll take the example we were talking about. Students will feel like they are getting an enriched learning experience relevant to the real world if the learning environment provides space for multimedia projects and interactions with other learners across the nation. So multimedia projects, interactions across with technology, all of those things, those are all programmatic things, right? All programmatic things. But when you ask yourself, what does an enriched learning environment look like? Then you think about, well, what's relevant to learners? What's stimulating to learners? And these are things that we can practice and grow and understand directly with our students day in and day out. We don't have to go beg someone for money or try to get a new projector or whatever the case may be to understand what's relevant for our students. We can take the day-to-day things we do, the simple things like attendance, and we can call attendance a different way every day until we get an idea of what actually our students care about. Will they every day just, and I don't even know if attendance works like this anymore because I don't know how it works anymore. I used to say present, that was me. You know, will they say present or here every day? Or will they tell you a story about what's in their life? Or will they, I don't know, there's any number of things, but there's all these things we already have in our control that can help us understand how we engage students. And that's the hard part behind putting in big ideas. When you want to get to the, you know, let's fundraise and let's find technology and let's, you know, get the right professional development experiences, oftentimes those things don't touch on what your students actually are engaged upon. And the end result is you put in all this time and effort. We call it it's called the trough of bad expectations. But you put in all this time and effort. This is time, this is effort, or this is outcomes. And something crazy like this happens where you put in so much time into try to get this big idea off the ground that you've never actually considered what your students think about it, how they care about it, how they engage in it. And you're down another path that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years in the making without initially addressing engagement. And so the whole point, we got a student that's feeling me. So the whole point of this exercise and this framework and this lean startup in education, this is the same thing that we do at EdSurge. It doesn't matter how many cool things we do, how many guides. If Mary Jo, she can make a 50 states guide and where 50 educators from across the country write about their ed tech experiences. But if no one reads it, what's the point? There's no point to that. And so the whole point of this is, can you think about what I want to do and what I'm good at, and then use what I'm good at to understand how to engage students. And once I know that I can engage students in a specific way that they've never been engaged before, can I use that as my foundation for trying the next big thing in education versus putting the next big thing in place and never worrying about student engagement. That's the whole point of this exercise. It's a flare and a focus. I'm glad it made some people a little uncomfortable because it's kind of the point, you know, we have to give a little bit more power to the students.
And it doesn't have to just be the students. So remind me your name, ma'am? Diana. Diana brought up a great point, which is, so we limited you by saying students will talk, act, da-da-da-da. But if you repurpose this activity, if you leave this spot blank, you will find that people won't just put students. Teachers, you may end up putting parents. You may end up putting other teachers yourself. And that is something that we highly encourage. If this is the type of activity that you feel is useful to you or could be useful to other people, you can take this, you can adjust it based on what you want. But you can make it more open. For the sake of today, we did students to kind of keep you a little bit more directed, but that's not to say that you couldn't also run this with thinking about the parents that you engage with day in and day out. And so actually on that note, what we're going to do is, oh, it's already up there. If you want to stay in touch, there's a bit.ly link, Educom Lean, and there's two things that this can be in service of. One, if you put your, it leads you to a Google Doc where if you put your information on there, we'll send you a digital version of this so that you can, use it, play with it, repurpose it the way that you want. But what we're also going to do is, if you're interested in having an accountability partner, we've put together a Slack channel where you guys can actually throw ideas in there around about how to use this process in the classroom, but also potentially with other teachers at your school. And I'm just going to leave this up all day. I won't check it until later tonight. So if you want that information, feel free to throw your info in there and we'll connect with you after today's event. But sort of last thoughts. I'm curious to hear any last thoughts kind of about using the lean process. Is it overwhelming? Is it useful? Could you see this going back into your classrooms, using this meaningfully? Thoughts?
In my experience, right, it's almost, and I like that you said that about changing from students, because what needed to sort of like even change was like the culture of the school around risk taking and allowing the space for change to happen was its own sort of like learn, measure, build. How do we create that sort of space before we even think about letting the teachers imagine something new to do in their classrooms? So changing that sort of like thing, thinking about students, to think about how are we as a school allowing space for these things to even happen. It's sort of like that sort of engagement around openness of the way we do things was like its own process.
Awesome. I agree.
What was really confusing? That's what's really important to me. Like, what sucked about all of this? Because
what did you find was
I think this is really important to try to empower, in the spirit of empowerment, to try to empower the people within the system who generally like take the most slack and have the least ability to change it. So if this wasn't meaningful, I want to know that too, because we can try to figure out how it doesn't become meaningful.
I find it very challenging as a teacher, and I'm sure other people do here too, about exactly what you have up there with the time and outcome. And I find often the more that I've put time into something, I tell myself I am getting the outcome that I want, whether or not it's there.
Right.
And so I'm always anxious when I see something in which there's a measuring process and I'm my sole form of measurement.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many times I've come to the end of the year and I've looked this up and I'm like, no, they don't know that. I thought, I only got to this point. So that's the one thing here that's my personal opinion.
That's a good point you brought up, and I'm going to ask Chris Avilas back there real quick. Can you tell me a little bit about what you said about how you could see yourself using this in your district? Obviously, it's not perfect, which is what you've been doing back there, writing down feedback, but kind of general thoughts about what this is.
Well, I was actually just writing a note when you said that, and it kind of you kind of helped me think about this. This would be great to start at a student level, and then work with the teachers. Let's say like in all my history classes, and then it moves up to a teacher level. Okay, here's what the kids said about what they want to be engaged. So now you see what they want. How can you help make that happen? And then you can pass it up to an administrative level, and say, here's what the kids want. Here's where the teachers are with what the kids want. How can you as administrators support what they're doing? So I thought that was really neat.
One of the conversations that we were having too, within that same respect, is, and I work with a lot of teachers, and one of the things that I find is we spend a lot of time admiring the problem, right? So there are things that are really easy to do and high impact. We have the money to do it, but we can't, because as a teacher, we don't have the money to do it. Push to the administrative perspective then, what if there was a grid that said, what of these things that are high impact, easy to do, but out of our control?
Right.
Right? What's the continuum of what we do? Because if we as an administration are spending all of our time and money and spinning wheels doing things that are high impact, easy to do, and teachers don't value it, isn't that a waste of time?
It is. That's a
right?
great
So
point.
how do we have a continuum here of what do we value? And the same thing for our students, because if we're spending our time spinning our wheels doing all of this stuff for our students, because we think it's going to make a difference, but they don't value it, then aren't we just spinning our wheels?
And that's what I think one of the biggest tweaks and notes I have made is if I was bringing this to teachers,
I would have them only focus on what's up in here, high impact and easy to do. Because, you know, like Kristen said, I don't want my teachers spinning their wheels going, oh man, this would be awesome if we just had $1 million. Well, you know, as a teacher, you have absolutely no control over, you know, the money that you get.
Right.
So that's something that we can take to an administrative level and say, here's what your teachers are doing based on easy to do, high impact. But here's what they're saying is high impact, hard to do because it's out of their control. So while your teachers are working on this, administrators, you should be trying to make this happen. And when that change is made, then we start back over. Hey, remember that high impact, easy to do thing that you needed the money for? Well, your admin got you the money. Now you can go ahead.
I hate to cut us off. Unfortunately, we're going already into the next conversation. I want to let you guys get to your next session. But I think what Chris sort of ended on is key. And if anything, this is something that I wish I had done every day in my classroom, just to kind of keep myself accountable between what I was doing that was high impact, low cost. So if you want this, let us know, because we are more than willing to share this with you so you can use it. All right, I'm going to let the rest of you guys go. Thank you so much for coming. And if you have any questions, we're going to hang around for a few minutes. Yeah. That's a good idea. Yes. Leave your sheets with the Post-its on there. We're going to take photos of those, so just leave them there for now. Absolutely.